convincing you to read my favorite books using 1-star reviews. Let's go. All right, what is up, mi gente? I am coming to you live from my couch. We're gonna go through 3 fantasy recs I have for you using 1-star reviews. Get your favorite drink, get a snack. We're gonna see how offended I get today and if I can handle all these burns, because the books I chose to recommend to all of you are pretty freaking great, and if I do say so myself, I have a wonderful taste. So the first book I want to recommend to you is actually Six of Crows. If you have not heard of this, I would be really surprised. This book definitely took over the book world by a storm a few years ago. Even though it was published a while back, it did resurface. It was so popular that it even became a TV show. So if you like heist, banter, friendships, like found family, some war, definitely fantasy, I definitely think this book is gonna be for you. I love the characters, I love their friendship, I love all of the shenanigans they get into, and the writing is great. So we're gonna see what some people had to say about my crows, because I freaking love them. Here we go, 1 star. I'm really sad that I wasted so many hours in this book. I really should have gone with my gut and just put it down. But no, everyone kept telling me to keep going. They told me it gets better. It doesn't. It does. It does get better. It's just an amazing plot line. There's so many twists and turns, and it's definitely filled with action, but also characters that have so much depth and growth that I just loved reading it. I honestly can't figure out what people are in this book. Not only is the plot as dry as a bowl of oatmeal, but the characters, the ones I was told were amazing, were also flat and boring. Oh my gosh, no, they're not. They are so not flat and boring. That's actually the reason I freaking love this book, is like the characters aren't just dull people with incredible things happening around them. They have gone through so freaking much. These crows, they each have their own storylines, their own faults, their own struggles, and their interactions are so funny and iconic that their lines are just so quotable in the book community. So much so that I literally DNF'd this 4 times. That should have been enough to make me kick this book to the curb, but no. I just hope others won't make the mistake of wasting their time like I did. What the heck? I don't know, 4 times and then you still leave a review. I don't know, if you quit it so many times, like, should you give a review? Like, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like, if you DNF, should you really leave a starred review? Next one. I was late to the reading party for the 2015 YA fantasy Six of Crows. This is what I mean. Like, it resurged, I think in 2020, maybe 2021. Also because it was gonna be a TV show, primarily Shadow and Bone. That's the first 3 books of this world, not necessarily a series. Six of Crows is separate, kind of like the spin-off, same world, post events of Shadow and Bone, different characters. Though I am 1 star in this book, I can completely understand why this best-selling novel is so beloved. You know, if you can understand, why are you leaving 1 star? Six of Crows gets a lot of things right, and then they pick up a lot of things. Because as nice as the writing, the world building, and the plotting of this book really is, I actively hated Six of Crows as I read it, and now that I have finished it, I hate Six of Crows even more. Why? Like, you're complimenting this book so much. There's so much I didn't read from this, but like, why do you actively hate it so much? This book is a wish fulfillment trope fest packed with ableism and misogyny. Okay, that's crazy too. So this book has disability rep, it has POC rep, like BIPOC rep, it has addiction rep, it has PTSD rep. It has a lot that I actually really like. So I'm just wondering where the ableism and misogyny is coming from. The setting of Six of Crows is a modern word I can't say, imaginary that equates death with sex, feelings with weakness, and ignores basic human psychology in favor of a James Bond level action tale. If you enjoy modern gonzo James Bond movies and 50 Shades of Grey, you will probably love Six of Crows. That does not make any sense to me, and here's why. Ever since reading like the romance, airplane, this book I didn't feel like had really any spiciness in it. It had beautiful intimacy, but nothing explicit or detailed, especially after doing the romance challenge and being exposed to what the book world community calls smut in books and spiciness. This has like 0.25, like 0.1 spiciness. There's nothing really intense that happens in here. So I really don't understand what this person is referring to when they say 50 Shades of Grey, or even going as far as saying it's a, you know, the word I can't say. I hate Six of Crows. Hate it with an infinite rage that burns deep in my gut and spits acid all over the ableism and misogyny that goes unchecked through this novel. Casbrecker does have a disability, and it says characters like Casbrecker, who uses a cane only as a story prop, reinforce that harmful attitude to a startling degree, and I really can't with this shit. Okay, Kaz does not use that cane as just a prop. 100% no. There's a story behind Kaz's limp, his gloves, like everything, but instead of letting that hinder him, he makes it really a part of who he is and how strong he actually is, because he says so himself. People look at him, they see his limp, and they're like, this kid is a goner, he can't live in the barrel with that disability, and he proves them all dead wrong. And I just love that he doesn't let that hinder him. It does exist in the book, okay? Because sometimes they're like, oh, this person has this, and they just mention it once and then moves on. No, Kaz has pains. He can't really move the way his other people can move, and he gets really fatigued, and he tells you in the book, or other people around him notice that he's starting to feel some pain. So I would strongly disagree with this as well. This is not me just getting offended, because Casbrecker is one of my ultimate favorite fictional characters, and I can totally do a video on that later. He is one of my favorites of all times, and I'm not just getting offended on his behalf. I really don't agree with this. 2. Teenage characters who are not really teenagers. Casbrecker and everyone else in his gang play the role of James Bond in this book. These teenagers all have adult mindsets, adult power bases, adult abilities, adult experience levels, and everyone in Kaz's gang behaves as an adult. Casbrecker reads like he is 35 or 43 years old, not 17. Inez should be at least 28 or 33, not 16. The same is true for Nina. Matthias, who's the oldest in the group, portrayed as 18 years. He reads more like Kaz's 35 and 40. I exclude Wyland from this list. I feel like this reviewer, like, are you sheltered or something? That's actually something I loved about this book. Yeah, they're teenagers, and you know what? There are some people in this world that go through way more than they should, and the Six Crows are a prime example of that. And I think if you've read this book, you can tell that everyone does sound older than they actually are to a certain degree. Jesper is still pretty freaking immature, and I think when you look at his background, you can see that he still acts like a reckless 17-year-old, but that had to grow up in the barrel, right? Wyland, if you noticed, Wyland doesn't really get called out in the same way that everyone else does. I know they said because they're not technically part of the Crows, but that's not even true. Wyland was very sheltered growing up. He did go through some things, but he still has this moral compass and this way where he can't do the bad things that Kaz does, and Kaz notices, and it's because he was sheltered. He didn't need to go through extreme things to survive, to eat, to have shelter. It wasn't until much later in his life that he actually started to go through things, and you see him grow up pretty fast too. So I would argue that it actually proves its point that all this trauma that all the characters have to carry really force them to grow the hell up, and you see that. And you do forget sometimes they're teenagers. I do as well. But my big selling point of this book is that it has incredible banter, and it's the banter that reminds the reader, at least for me, that they're just freaking teenagers. And I know it's not just me, because I've literally seen like memes or posts where people are like, oh, when you forget that these criminal level heist masters are just teenagers, and they show like a dialogue they have amongst themselves, and it warms my heart, because in those moments I think the characters do feel like they're young and they're allowed to be, and they have each other be, even though they have lost family or have been betrayed by family so deeply. I think if you're like, oh, that person is too young to act this way, I would reframe your way of seeing life, or maybe you're privileged to have never met someone who's so young and has endured so much that they do sound like they're 43. We're getting deep in here, so let's move on and see if there's anything better. Okay, here's a short one. It took me all of 2 chapters, maybe 20 pages, to realize this is not the book for me. It's got tense names you can't remember or pronounce, political intrigue out the wazoo, a sadistic streak, and a heist keeper plot. All of those elements immediately turned me off to this book. Not my cup of tea at all. So this is what I mean. Like, you have to like these elements to enjoy this book for sure. I have a friend who really wants to read Six of Crows. I personally love to to know everything about a world. So if a certain book is a spin-off, I want to read the original. And even though you don't have to read the original, I want to, because I want the full picture of what the author created. Oftentimes, authors don't spend so much time world building in a sequel or in a spin-off because they already created that world in the first part. And maybe they'll do a little bit more because you're in a new city, you're in a new part of the kingdom. But I have heard from people who have not read the original series, a lot of readers end up confused because it sounds like everything's so random. So this friend decided to just jump into Six of Crows instead of reading Shadow and Bone first. And she found out she was a lot like me. Like, she wants the full picture. She was so confused. She didn't understand really what a Grisha was, why suddenly they have powers, what is this post-Civil War they're talking about. And so they decided to stop reading, went back and started reading Shadow and Bone. So if that sounds like it's something that you would struggle with, because this person literally said, oh, they're talking about politics out of the wazoo, it makes me think they did not read Shadow and Bone because they're confused, right? Okay, we'll do one more. Every new chapter, I could find a new deal breaker problem with this story, and it was not a pleasant experience at all. Not a pleasant experience at all. I began reading this book recommendation of my best friend. You have a good best friend. And I feel so bad for not liking it, as you should. But I think she knew I would not. Like, if she knew you wouldn't like it, why would she recommend it? The first thing on the list is the characters. They're the freaking best part. When people freaking criticize my crows, I'm like, I don't understand. The core group of characters might well be the most boring group of protagonists I have ever read. Boy, most boring you have ever read. When you're starving on the streets of the barrel, you can't afford to just be like, la la la, I'm gonna act my age. Act pretty freaking reckless like young kids. Like, who else thinks they can break into the most secure prison of the entire kingdoms? Only these freaking dummies would. Inej and Nina, the two girls of the team, are also boring, and they take part in romantic subplots that are as shallow as they can be. So not true. And I think it's crazy that this reviewer decides to paint this book as if it painted the female characters so wrong. Nina and Inej have so much power, and the author does not shy away from showing how much power they actually have in the group, in the world, within themselves. They are powerful female MCs. And I love the curvy representation and the BIPOC representation in both of them. This reviewer doesn't mention anything about Jesper and Wylan, who are also thrown into romantic subplot that can seem surface level. Matthias was also in a romantic subplot, and Kaz was also in a romantic subplot. Like, they were all in romantic subplots. Don't spin it. Don't be shady and spin it like that only the girls are thrown into a romantic thing and they're boring, because it's not true. Second fantasy book I want to recommend to you is The Raven Boys. I have not talked about this series yet, and I especially love it for the characters. It's such a difficult plot to explain. It's so difficult that even Maggie Scheifader, the author, would have these contests where if you could summarize this book really well, she would give you personalized copy, her own personal art, whatever, because it's a little tricky to explain. I would say though, if you enjoy some dark academia, this is definitely for you. If you enjoy a little bit of like magic and witchiness and ley lines, this is also for you. Plot twists and characters that have depth, friendships, found family, awesome, powerful women, a class difference. This book is definitely for you. I hadn't experienced deep characters, these three-dimensional characters, until The Raven Boys. By now, I would say there are a lot of books like that. There are definitely more books out there with characters that have these three-dimensional feel. Her characters have so much depth that in each seminar I have gone to, the number one question I see pop up over and over for her, because she teaches how to write, is how do you make your characters so deep? How do you make them three-dimensional? Because she has become such a master at doing this. All her characters feel like they could come out into our world and you would know exactly how they would interact with our world. I do have to argue that this book isn't for everybody. I was so disappointed in this book. There was so much hype and excitement to read it, and the beginning was good. It had potential. I love that there was finally a psychic, clairvoyant, spiritual team book. I would say yes, it has that. But as I kept reading, the story never picked up. I felt like the whole book was a plateau. Ended up not caring for any of the characters either, which is never good. Grr. never. I won't be reading the next book in this series. That's freaking unfortunate. You know, you do need a little bit of time to get into this, but once you do, it's so good and the characters are great. How is this book so popular? Did I get a bootleg copy with horrid writing? Oh my gosh, I love her writing. I've actually never read her series Shiver, which is a werewolf story when Twilight was so big. So I read The Raven Boys first, and her writing is awesome, and it's very Maggie-like. There's just some dry humor and her writing is quirky. So I can finish a 500-page book in a sitting if it's that good. If it's engaging enough, I can do it in 2 to 4 days. This book has taken me close to 10 days and I've not even reached midway. It's time to let go. Not you acting like this is the Titanic and you're letting Jack drown. The characters show their depth later. When you meet Blue, who's our main MC in the first book, she sees the world through a very bitter lens, maybe bitter or shallow lens, even though she thinks she isn't shallow. And that means we as readers see it the same way. And it isn't until she's opening up more to other characters and they open up to her that you realize like, oh, there's a lot more in this world than I thought. This is hard because most everyone I follow here seems to have loved it. I loved it. I am half convinced I've got a different book from the one they've reviewed. The book starts by introducing a bunch of characters from the get-go, and if you can't tell the different main characters apart at the 40% mark without having to reread, you've lost me. They are all so totally different. Adam, Gansey, Noah, Ronan, and Blue. Like, how many years later has it been? Oh my god. Like almost like 7 years late. 7 years later? I'm so bad at math. 7 years later and I still remember their names. I know that I love them, but I've been introduced to a lot of fantasy characters since and I still remember their names. It reads like the author who fell in love with a genre decides to pen her love letter to it by making a concoction of the genre tropes like the poor middle-class loner girl who falls for the rich, seemingly a jerk guy, the other angsty dude needed to complete the triangle, and the quest nobody except these guys will succeed in. According to Goodreads, that should be a 1-star since I didn't enjoy it, but I'll give it 2 because I'm saving the 1-star for the really special ones. Why do you kind of sound like a little serial killer of books right there? Like, I'm saving the 1-star for the really special ones. Yes, I really hated it, so 1-star it is. This is that special one. Oh my gosh. That description is so funny because it's kind of true. There are a lot of tropes in this book, but she makes it work. Like, it's really that good. And the angsty guys, I freaking love Ronan so much. I love him so much. Also a top fictional favorite character of mine of all time. We all loved him so much. There's even a spin-off on Ronan. The Raven Boys was my Mount Everest. I got about 60 pages in before I had to stop. The characters annoyed me. The plot was confusing. It seemed like a jumble of things put together, and for the life of me, I couldn't get through it. It's definitely one of those books you have to like sit down and be intentional with it. I think there are some books that are a little bit easy to read, especially if you've been in that genre. I found a lot of the romance books I've read were a lot easier to handle than high fantasies because the world is my world. We don't have to do a ton of world building. It's mainly about how the characters meet and then how they interact. But a lot of other books, when you're introduced to a different world, different names, it has a deeper plot or it's a little bit more complicated, you do have to pay attention to more. Now I would say with the Raven Boys, it's set in our modern world. It's not any new world. It's not high fantasy like that. But because this is a little dark academia, Gansey read this history to look for a Welsh king. So it's nothing super complicated. I would say it's Maggie's writing that makes it more intricate and complex. So if you're not really following along with Maggie and her humor and the way she draws all these lines together and explains these characters, you can get confused, okay? You can. And I got the feeling that I was supposed to pick up hidden things in the text and it just didn't happen. You do, like I said, it's an intentional read. You had ghosts, psychics, magical forest, ancient kings, along with abuse, murder, and family drama. That does not sound like a good time. We cannot be friends. Some chapters were beautifully written, while other had me slightly bored and definitely confused. But then I passed the half point of the book and things suddenly started to make sense. It is a little bit of a mystery and there's definitely foreshadowing in there that Maggie loves to drop. I got pulled in. I started enjoying it more and more. I got blindsided by an amazing plot twist. I started to care about all of the characters instead of only one or two. I loved Ronan from the start, Blue too. brought in. It suddenly didn't feel like a whole lot of things jumbled together. It felt like a book, and a good book at that. So then why would you review it 1 star? So in the end, they gave it 3.5 stars. I still can't get over the fact that it took me a long time to get into it, but for some reason they left their rating as 1, I guess. I don't want to read or listen to another Maggie Stiefvater book ever again. I love the comments how they're like, why? I don't like her writing style or characters. Yeah, like I said, she has a very specific writing style, kind of like if you've ever read Melissa Albert, she has a very specific writing style. Like they're a little bit more unique than your typical writers, and that can be a really good thing or a really bad thing. The series also gets way better over time. Like it just gets better and better and better. You have no idea how many times I gasped out loud in this, and Call Down the Hawk made me gasp even more, but we'll get to that series in a different video. The Rain Boys didn't do too bad. Okay, the next fantasy series is my middle grade love, Keeper of the Lost Cities. I dedicated a whole video to it because I will never stop recommending this book. Shannon Messenger, the author, is one of the best cliffhanger authors I've ever read. Her cliffhangers literally leave me screaming. I am so mad that I can't get the next book right away so I can find out what happens. There's so much in there. She's also an author that has not frustrated me so much because we get way more questions than answers in every single book, and yet I'm still reading and I still feel like happy with whatever she gives me. Not completely satisfied, okay, Shannon? Not completely satisfied. Now, this book is actually middle grade, and I was just so surprised by how much I ended up loving this series. My middle school kids and our book club decided to pick this book. This book was so loved because 3 out of our 6 or 7 that wanted to read fantasy had already read this, and they're huge, you guys. These are big books. They wanted us to read it so bad and wanted us to all talk about it together that they opted to read it again. And I'm really surprised that a lot of other adults actually love this so much as well. And I want the YA/new adult fantasy people to really read this book because it's so freaking good. If you love fun, adventure, some mystery, again, an academia setting, can you sense a pattern here? I clearly love academic settings, found family, beautiful friendships, funny banter, and beautiful lessons on grief and friendship and family. This book is for you. It's so wholesome. It's so beautiful. It made me so laugh, but I'm just so surprised that Shannon Messenger touches on really important themes, but she also makes this book so fun, so dark, adventurous. Her signings are always sold out. These books are super chunky. I thought last year the longest book I read was Babel. It turned out it was Keeper of the Lost Cities, book 8. It was 752 pages, and these middle school kids eat it up. It's so freaking good. I could keep gushing on and on about this book, but let's get into 1-star reviews. And I'm starting with book 1, of course. Honestly, I hated this book and I was expecting so much more. This is a pretty disgusting book. What? Especially with someone like Sophie for the main character. I generally don't like Mary Sue characters, and this is a perfect stereotype for it. She is annoyingly special. She's so smart, but in reality, she's literally an idiot. I've read several books in this series, and all Sophie does for at least 80% of the book is go, I wonder why. The romance in this is messed up. She meets a random guy elf, and you know, they all have to be good looking and perfect because they're elves. So naturally, she has a crush on every single one around her age, and they all like her back. Wonderful, isn't it? Oh my god, this person's so bitter at Sophie, which this isn't even true. She doesn't fall for everyone around her, and people around her are clearly intrigued by her because she is an elf, which they look a lot like us, but they're just super gorgeous. But she grew up in the human world, so people are intrigued. It's kind of like not like other girls or, you know, type of thing, but she just really grew up in this like wholesome, simple family. And so she's just not used to the glamour of the elven world, even if for them it's pretty simple. The last thing is I'd say all of the characters would be better if they were more diverse. The dwarves, the people who do work for the elves, just happen to have dark skin. But no, they're not servants. They willingly help them. I don't like that, and I wish there were some more major characters that are diverse. Occasionally there's a minor character that has slightly dark skin tone, but not enough to make this book any less stereotypical than it actually is. You know what? I think it's kind of valid. I think this review is valid in the dark skin thing. I never realized that the dwarves in this book willingly help. That could be a really weird bias that the author has, unconscious bias. I did have the same problem in the beginning, that I wish it had more diverse characters in there. And so I would say with Shannon, I definitely saw Sophie as Shannon Messenger, this blonde girl with brown eyes. And in this book, brown eyes are actually super special because all the elves have blue eyes. I think when an author writes, they definitely have their bias in there. The more you go into these books, the more you see diverse characters. But here's the thing, I am so happy we have more BIPOC authors coming out. I'm so happy that if I want to read a book that has more diversity and shows that more, I can go find it a lot easier now than I used to back then. I love Keeper of the Lost Cities because it has an amazing plot line. I haven't really seen every single problematic thing with it because I'm just really enjoying the story. But perhaps I should analyze this book a little bit more like this review is saying and really see if there really is some harmful bias in this book. Overall though, I would say it's been really fun to read this story, and there are a ton of different characters in there. Granted, the main ones are white characters and a lot of the diverse characters suffer through a lot, but a lot of the other white main characters also suffer through a lot. I think I would just have to analyze it a little bit more. I know so many people who love this book, and while they're definitely entitled to their opinion, I don't know why anyone would enjoy this. The magic system is ridiculous. The main character is the complete Mary Sue. The writing is average at best, and it's overall really boring. The only character I liked was Keith. I freaking love Keith. And let's just touch on this Mary Sue thing a little bit. I don't think I've heard that term before. There's a lot of terms I grew up with that I haven't heard either in Spanish or English. English is my first language, but I grew up in a Latin household where we have different sayings, right? My parents weren't gonna come out here with the Mary Sue stuff. I haven't heard that term. I'm guessing it's like a goody two shoes, but Sophie, I guess, is a little bit Mary Sue, but also not. She's very rebellious. She's hyper independent due to her trauma. And so she has a hard time actually coming to people for help, which really bites her in the booty a lot of times in this book. So I can't say she's just this like goody good person all the time. And Keith is a favorite of mine. I love Keith, and I was so happy that we get his point of view a little bit in the series. I didn't like him enough to want to continue reading this 9-book long series. This is too many books. I don't care how good the series is. 9 is too many. And I say 9 is not enough, huh? How about that? I was actually happy to hear that she was actually gonna make 10 books total, not just 9 books total. I love this world building. Someone, can I please live in this world? Why'd you give it 1 star and that's your freaking review? God, the amount of times I rolled my eyes at this book. I have as much praise as I have patience, very little. Would I recommend this? Maybe, sure. To a 7-year-old child. Here I am, a grown-ass adult. I honestly don't know what to say. This is middle grade, but my 12-year-old self wouldn't enjoy this. Oftentimes, I feel bad for not continuing a series because I'm losing out. Boring and forgettable. Not good if you read it young and reminiscing in the nostalgia. Not for me. Look, man, it's not for everybody, but definitely if you're a fantasy lover, this is an epic story. My main complaint is that this author seems to lean far too heavily on the everyone knows what's going on except the main character and no one will tell her anything tactic. In very small quantities, it could be a fairly good tool. Use it too much, however, and readers get really annoyed. He doesn't tell the main character, Sophie, anything until the very end. This got real old real fast. This is why I'm actually surprised. I enjoyed this book because I can get really annoyed with that stuff. I'm like, give me answers and give it to me now. But I would say that her interactions in this world, her found family, everything else that happens really makes up for it. And the more you read and the more you slowly find out what's happening, the more you kind of get why they kept so much from her. You're just as annoyed and frustrated as Sophie. You want the answers like Sophie does. But sometimes there are more pressing things that are happening in this world because as much as it looks glittery and beautiful and wealthy, the elven world is not perfect. Another complaint I have is that while the world of Keeper of the Lost Cities is very colorful and imaginative, it doesn't seem to mesh together very well. Messenger calls the primary beings in her story elves, which feels very fantasy-esque to me. However, the rest of the world strikes me as sci-fi. Fantasy and sci-fi can mix, but you have to be a very talented author to do so effectively. That's pretty cool because I actually like a mix of sci-fi and fantasy together, and I think in this world it makes sense. I think the fantasy aspect is the world, the realm that's in it, but a lot of the world functions on technology, and so I understand where they're coming from with the sci-fi part. But these characters are also born or eventually develop a gift, right? So they have like this power, and I think that's where the fantasy aspect comes from. None of it distracts me from the other. I'm not like, oh, why does she have a power but they still have cars or something like that, you know? But I actually really like the combination. Every single person tells Sophie she's special after she finds out she's an elf, which let me just tell you, elves with wands absolutely took me out. I cringed so hard when I read that I actually shut the book unintentionally. She's a Mary Sue. So there we go with the Mary Sue thing again. I would say definitely give it a try yourself. I was immediately sucked in and I did not expect to be. A lot of these reviews definitely have something valid that are gonna make me think about this book and how I recommend it more deeply, because I definitely felt some of these issues toward maybe book 4, book 5. I felt this. We have different characters in there, and I feel like a lot of people forget to write in Latin characters that are not just like spicy or Latin lover stereotype. In a lot of books I read recently, I've been really sad to see that yes, there's diversity in there, but not for Latin characters. You don't really have Latin characters in there unless I'm reading a Latin author, and that makes me really sad too, because I feel like, come on, like where are we? I want to see myself in Fourth Wing. I want to see myself in Raven Boys. Like I want to see myself represented somewhere. And so instead I've been actively seeking out authors like me who write characters like me and my cousins and my family. Definitely gonna get me thinking. I did not expect us to go super deep upon reading these reviews, but that's why it's so important to read other people's perspective and have these discussions and think about it. I had fun making this video. I had fun laughing at some of these reviews, getting personally offended by a lot of this as well. I hope I convinced you to read at least one of these books. I know we ended on a heavy note, but you know what? It's okay. That's what we're here for. We're here to adventure together. If you enjoyed hanging out and you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe, like and comment, do all of the fun stuffs. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. I'm really gonna have to think about that one.